Now, it was surprisingly stated in mid-2015 that we would see a new Titanfall game in 2016. Well, it's now confirmed that in the later part of 2016, possibly rolling into 2017, we will be seeing a new Titanfall. And not just a sequel, but a, quote, new Titanfall experience, said EA. It was confirmed back in March of 2015 that Respawn were working on a sequel. That's something which has been confirmed, and in October of 2015, Vince Zampella, co-founder of Respawn, said that the sequel would be a multi-platform title, suggesting launch across PC, Xbox and PS4. One telling factor to how they're approaching the game was that Zampella said in regard to the multiplayer-only title, he wouldn't have done it differently. And he also went on to mention the maps and indirectly season passes by stating, I think having the maps like that in packs, it does split the community, it makes it harder for matchmaking, it's messy. I don't know we won't do it again, I can't say that for sure, but the idea would be to do something different. Well, something different is an approach we can all agree on, because Titanfall as a game was, let's not dance around it, fairly a disaster. From when the game was released, it was barely a month before the game was severely discounted and hemorrhaging players. This game was bleeding out. Why though? And what could they do to avoid this with a sequel? Now, Titanfall was really one of those games which was firmly console aligned. It had only 6 players around and had all the hallmarks of a COD space variant. And I mean that truly, not just, oh, what game don't we enjoy anymore, it's like that. No. The gameplay felt very similar to the sort of COD style and the way in which you moved around and so on and so on. The inclusion of the AI bots to fill up the huge maps, and these were, as you'll remember, a requirement to make the Titan gameplay viable. They had to be huge because otherwise it just wouldn't have worked. It just left people bewildered, frankly. This map size was obviously a problem in that you could play a whole round sometimes, barely seeing another human player. All you would have is the Titans just stomping around all over the place. The use of weapons also, like the lock-on pistol, were especially frustrating for people, especially on PC, I guess. I seem to remember Jack posting a video where he had like a flawless round just using that auto-lock pistol. Super irritating. Being a futuristic game, it had a lot of locking weapons, which arguably does make sense, but when it comes down to a gameplay perspective, it's just incredibly frustrating as an FPS. You want it to be primarily aimed at player skill, and if you have a weapon which does that skill part for you, then suddenly everything else just seems pointless. I guess ultimately, once you understood the mechanics of it, there was nothing to really bring you back there. The maps, which were forcibly large to accommodate the Titans, meant that as a player you had to cover these vast distances involved, and if there were 2 enemy players in a Titan, this meant you only had 4 people to locate. And once you start to think of details like this, it's easy to see why the game died pretty quickly, and you have to ask the question why Respawn didn't question this earlier on, because when you think, that's actually a fairly logical conclusion, that people would get tired of running around trying to locate just a handful of other players. But still, was there anything good in the game? Yes, there was some good in the game. The Titans themselves being called in and the way in which you sort of interacted with them worked really smoothly. Your transition in and out of them, that was seamless. Battling other Titans was generally fairly interesting, depending on your weapon choice and setup with it. You could find, it was balanced in how you'd fight them. Sometimes it could be a bit of a long distance sort of peeking fight, but often you'd get some good battling, a bit of CQC or even melee involved there as well, depending a bit on the map and again, that's your loadout. The wall running parkour style for the players on the ground, it worked nicely. Generally it was a little stuck on magnetic feel when you look back at it. Unfortunately though for Titanfall, I think people will of course tag Call of Duty onto it more now than ever because of its choice to adopt this wall running style in the recent games. At the time though, it did give you new ways to use space and generally engage in combat. Climbing aboard a Titan and to rip out its driver, that was a nice feature, meaning infantry could have actually, you could chart a route and you could almost stalk a Titan sort of from the ground or on the buildings above it and then jump across to try and neutralize it. That was good. It made you feel a bit of a challenge to take them down. I remember many of the weapons having a fairly nice look and feel, and the overall aesthetic of the game in general wasn't bad. It was futuristic, it looked good, the designs there were nice. Having to exit the map, I remember as well, as part of the round, that was quite a nice feature. It felt a good game dynamic and added to the feeling overall with playing that round. You know, it was like a bit of a thing to do at the end, and it kind of created that nice sort of transition through to the end. But still, none of these smaller elements really could make up for the stagnating gameplay, and that's what people quickly woke up to. So what could Titanfall produce in 2016 to avoid the same failings of the previous game? Well, the most obvious change required is to the map and the player counts. If they still plan to include Titans in Titanfall, which seems guaranteed, they're going to need to address the fact that people don't want to play on huge maps with no players. This seems the primary reason for the game dying quickly, and if they don't change this, I would fully expect the same thing to just happen again. I would suggest that for the map sizes, a minimum, you're going to need really a minimum of 20 aside, so 40 players, to ensure that continual level of engagement. If they wanted to throw some AI in the mix there to just sort of bulk it up a bit, I don't personally have a huge issue with that. Having bots in around to add some aesthetic, providing you actually have enough human players as well, I think it's okay. Titanfall back in 2014 didn't do this though, and that's, you know, what the issue was. Aesthetically, I think we need to see a new world for Titanfall and new Titans as well. I feel a certain, you know, sort of different look and general setup to those Titans, and, you know, the physicality of themselves is going to be present. That seems a very obvious change to make, to just sort of update them. To have them play out though across a far wider variety of environments would be a great change, not just visually but also mechanically. If the Titans could perhaps now climb over objects, grapple at buildings, or have to pull objects out of the way, they could make that so, you know. Titans, you know, give them some other role to play other than being just a giant death machine, so there's variety there. Perhaps Titans could move objects out of the way to unlock new routes for players on the ground, so that perhaps they have to, you know, smash some rocks out of the way, or, you know, pull urban debris like a collapsed bridge aside, or lift it up, or maybe even, you know, lift that and create other new routes for people like this. Things, you know, there's a load of different sort of ways that it could look at that. I think for this new iteration, they're going to need to think of things beyond just running and shooting for them to add that variety there. They could also push the Titan builds as well, making some maybe like real absolute tanks which take a huge kicking to go down, but have far more limited weapon options and travel much slower as well. These could be used by the infantry on the ground to sort of take cover behind, hang off the back of them and sort of, you know, hide behind, so they could just, you could like run up, grab on the back of it, take a little ride forward and then jump off again. And maybe if there's a heavily defended objective on one map, maybe you need some of these hardcore Titans to sort of push up to it, and then the guys jump off the back and engage. So, you know, I think there's some variety and ways in which you could look at using the Titans other than just running around killing everything. When it comes to the gameplay, I always felt that it was actually not too bad, but it was elements like the auto-locking guns that really were the killer. Some of the death cards also gave fairly unfair advantages, such as being able to see enemies through the walls, but I think this was designed to allow people to actually have a chance to find other players, because they were so few and far between. These really are just my initial thoughts about a sequel. Realistically, the biggest hurdle they have to overcome is the one stated already, the map size versus the player count. This factor, if they're able to change it, will, in my opinion, determine the success or failure of the next Titanfall. They also need to work on making you feel more invested in the game. With The Division this week, I was surprised how much I cared about what I was doing, and I think it comes down to, in part, that the incremental updates, but also the limited tactical feel, albeit a bit arcadey, the sort of tactical way in which you move and approach people. Titanfall was not like that. It was all about the running and gunning in its first incarnation. It was very sort of action movie, I suppose, you know, jump off a building, you know, it had that sort of speed, adrenaline, but then the actual sort of raw body of it was just not there. If Respawn were brave enough and tried to throw in a more skill-based, tactical element to the game, that would be supremely positive. Do I think it'll happen though? No. So tell me your thoughts about a new Titanfall game. What changes do you want to see to make the game successful in 2016? What do they need to do to make you actually want to purchase that game? But also, what do you think they need to do to add the longevity to it? I think the most telling question of all was when I actually got to ask one of the Titanfall devs at an event, and I asked them, you know, what are you doing to include longevity in this game? What are you going to do? What one feature is going to have people keep coming back to the game? And they couldn't give me an answer. Thanks for watching, guys, and be sure to leave your thoughts about Titanfall in 2016.